Tennessee picked up a commitment over the weekend, a guy they had to get, absolutely had to get. We all agree they had to get Boo Carter, an athlete committed at the 40-40 Club in New York City. And he committed to Tennessee. We always thought he was committing to Tennessee, but there was a debate at the end that he might go to Michigan. I know Colorado was in there for a while. Boo Carter is a 4-star, could play wide receiver or defensive back out of Bradley Central in Chattanooga. It would have been a devastating blow for Tennessee if they didn't get him to commit. This was an absolute must, and they got him. Jaru, how big of a deal is Boo Carter's commitment? Or is it not a big deal, just they're hitting par because they had to get him?
I would say it is a pretty big commitment just for the fact that Michigan made a very, very big push in these final weeks. He was on a Michigan official visit last weekend, the weekend before this past one. So, I mean, it was a big pickup, and something that Josh Heupel has emphasized that we did not see, Jeremy Pruitt, Butch Jones emphasize is recruiting the state of Tennessee. Whenever you have a guy like Boo Carter who lives an hour away from campus, that's a guy you have to get to Tennessee. And in the past, those guys would end up at Georgia, Alabama, or like a Michigan. So also another thing is it was good PR for Tennessee. His recruitment was a pretty big thing. He was very active on Twitter throughout his whole recruitment. So getting him to Tennessee is another big thing in that standpoint. But I think if you had to ask me what the biggest impact would be, it is just locking down Tennessee, because you see that with Georgia. Like the guys in Georgia that they want, they're going to get. So Tennessee has to keep doing that, especially in a talent-rich state.
Well, I am going to tell you, Joe, that one of the reasons that doesn't happen, and that goes back to the Fulmer days, is Tennessee recruits have traditionally been overrated. Dave gets annoyed when I say that, but Tennessee high school football just isn't on the level that the other states are on. And in the past 10 years with recruiting rankings, that seemed to change on paper, but it didn't bear out when they got to college. And I think there's a lot of politicking that went on. The most obvious example is Jalen Hurd, who was a 5-star and totally flamed out, and Butch Jones was trying to play him over Alvin Kamara when Alvin Kamara was clearly better. So I would say I understand where it comes from, but it seems like Boo Carter. So I'm raising a red flag on Edwin Spillman for that. Sorry, I know people think I'm a little unfair with that, but I am raising a red flag. I think Boo Carter is good in his own right. He had a lot of schools targeting him. He's going to play, you think, defensive back at Tennessee, right?
Yeah, Tennessee's recruiting him more for the secondary.
Okay, which they obviously need. And at 6 feet, 180 pounds, he should be okay back there. Do you think, curiously, it's funny, when you told us over the weekend that Boo Carter was being offered to play wide receiver at Michigan and defensive back at Tennessee, but if you're an athlete, you'd rather play wide receiver at Tennessee and defensive back at Michigan, given the systems, wouldn't you?
It is a very weird situation. Obviously, he plays both in high school, so I don't think I don't know how much he cares about it. Obviously, I mean, that could change. Like we saw Cam Seldon was a wide receiver, and he got to campus and turned into one of the best running backs in spring football. So position changes aren't immune, but I do have been told that Boo Carter was being recruited by Tennessee to play in the secondary. And obviously right now, if you had to pick between wide receiver and secondary, what some of the biggest needs for Tennessee are, I guess you'd have to point at the secondary.
Yeah, far and away easily. I've made predictions on the show, and actually I'm going to see I want to see what your thoughts are, because you haven't made it with us, which is I've made an insistence that one true freshman that's going to start is either going to be Jordan Matthews or Ricky Gibson at cornerback this year. And I want to know if you agree with me on that.
Yeah, I could see. I've been high on Jordan Matthews specifically because he's a guy that passed up, whenever you think of DBs, you think of LSU and maybe in Alabama or Ohio State. And he passed up those schools that come to Tennessee. So when those schools are recruiting a defensive back, you have to assume that they think he could impact year one. And to come to Tennessee, I would expect him to play on the field. Also for those guys too, and we talked about it a little bit with BYU, the BYU transfer. Why can't I think of his name? Defensive back.
Gabe Judy Lally?
Yes, Judy Lally. We talked about learning defensive back is not as difficult as maybe a safety position. So for him and even some of the true freshmen, if you just teach them some of the basic concepts of defensive back with the defense that Tennessee runs, they could probably excel pretty early on the field. So I wouldn't be surprised with either of those guys, but I think specifically Jordan Matthews would have the biggest impact.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because you're right. It's Tennessee's best defensive backs, their best cornerbacks over the past 5 years were recruited as athletes. Most notably, Alontae Taylor and Bryce Thompson were both recruited as athletes. I'm with you on Jordan Matthews. What I said about Tennessee, it's the reverse with Louisiana. Louisiana, you know, being from there, but Louisiana recruits are constantly underrated. And I think it just has something to do with LSU doesn't have much of a presence online the way the other schools do. So,
well, I mean, think about Justin Jefferson was a 3-star that nobody wanted.
yeah.
And now he's making him lots of money playing for the Vikings and won a ring. So, I mean, that's just one example of it. I like what you said about the athletes, though, because I think when you look at a guy like Boo Carter, who plays wide receiver and defensive back, if you have to remember wide receiver plays and you're playing the position, it becomes a lot easier on the other side to recognize what the wide receivers are doing and being familiar with the offensive concepts and stuff like that. So I think that could play a role as well. But we talked about it before, too. I really just think defensive back is a easy position to stick somebody in and teach them quickly to play. Easier than like a safety. Because we saw like Wesley Walker struggled a little bit last year learning safety so quickly, but now that he has an offseason, I'm sure he'll be fine. And especially in Tennessee's offense, I just feel like you said, like some of those early guys will probably get a lot of reps this season just because there's still not as much depth as I'm sure Willie Martinez would like in that secondary.
Yeah, and Walker came on towards the end of last season as he started to develop a little more. So you're right. And Dave and I said the same thing. Fred White on Friday somewhat disagrees with us, but I think cornerback I think it's second to running back in terms of positions. It's not hard to pick up quickly. Maybe wide receiver. I don't know. Cornerback, wide receiver. In Josh Heupel's offense, I don't think there's much picking up to do at wide receiver at all. But
I think wide receiver might be pushing it a little bit just because in Josh Heupel's offense, there is a lot of like the option route trees that you do have to remember and know what to do. But I would say running back would be another easy position to pick up. Obviously, yes, you do have to know when you run out, and especially in Josh Heupel's offense with the running back in the slot, it might be a little tougher. But I can see running back, cornerback being positions where if you're not 100% comfortable with the playbook, you can still succeed.
Yep. Going to the message boards, Reggie.Tom says we need to lock down William Nwaneri. We're going to probably talk about him in the next segment. Ask if we're going to be around for the NCAA live stream this evening. Reggie.Tom, I'm not sure about the NCAA live stream. Tell me about that a little more. Travis says he tried to troll Michigan fans on Twitter about Boo Carter, and they were not trying to get Vol Twitter smoke. But man, could you just imagine if Twitter were around in 1997 with Michigan and Charles Woodson beat Peyton Manning for the Heisman? Then they would have gotten Vol Twitter smoke anyway. There's Elias Gray says it's been decades since Bradley Central did much at Tennessee. Okay, I mean, I will say this, Elias. Chattanooga they're more accurately evaluated at Chattanooga than they are coming out of the Nashville region. I will say that. Chattanooga had, I believe, most notably Reggie White came out of Chattanooga. And
I also think, Caleb, with the private schools, it doesn't matter as much because they play statewide, and usually your private schools have a lot of good talent.
That's true. That's a really good point. I more base it off of where I think recruiting rankings sometimes overvalue players a lot of times based on the politicking. We know Tennessee targets Nashville kids specifically from Nashville, so I think they might overvalue kids from that area. But that's a great point with high school. And Reggie.Tom says if he were Boo Carter, he would want to play defensive back at Tennessee. Now that's a question. You're Boo Carter. Yeah, wide receiver at Tennessee is like that's the dream because Josh Heupel's going to he's going to scheme you open all the time. But you're more likely to play, honestly, from the day you step on campus, defensive back. So, Jaru, if you're Boo, would you prefer playing defensive back to receiver?
If he doesn't mind defensive back, like I know some athletes just hate playing one side of the ball, but they do it because if they go to like a small high school or something in that manner. But if Boo doesn't mind playing defensive back and enjoys that, then at Tennessee, I would 100% go defensive back. Because you look at Tennessee, if you're a wide receiver as a freshman or sophomore and you're not getting the job done, there's no waiting around. They're bringing in a transfer to play, like a Dante Thornton is coming in and taking your spot. With defensive back, I mean, at the rate Tennessee's going right now, they need depth, they need bodies, and I can see Boo Carter making an instant impact next season as soon as he's on campus, like you said. So that is a really good point. I know a ton of players talk about playing time being a huge factor in their recruitment, but I could see that being a huge factor for Boo because, I mean, I'm sure they're promising him early playing time because if he's successful at DB, he'll have early playing time at Tennessee right now.
Yep. And Mr. Jones says Michigan fans are boo-hooing. Well played, Mr. Jones. Travis points out there's been 5 or 6 kids from East Tennessee recently make the league. You're actually right, Travis. I actually would say East Tennessee kids are underrated. Just Nashville kids are overrated a lot of times because it's becoming a big market, and I think a lot of recruiting services are based out of there. Portions of the program brought to you by City Heating and Air Conditioning. Might not need a new unit until if your AC isn't working. Just go to cityheatandair.com. 50 years in Tennessee. cityheatandair.com. Integrity matters.